Mongoose allows you to add additional properties to a model that define how it can be saved or updated. So let's go ahead and create a second model that we'll be using in the API, which is a user. So I'm going to pop that directly underneath the item model definition here. So let's create a variable user. And again, we'll call the model method of the Mongoose object. So the first argument here is going to be the model name, which is item, and then we'll have our object of properties. So there's going to be 3 properties on this model. The first will be name, and we'll make that a string. Oops. And then we'll go email, and again that's going to be a string. And password, also a string. Now we want to add some validation properties to our model. These will create a check before the document is saved to ensure that we're saving valid data. So we're first going to add a required validation to each property. So we'll go required true, like that. And I'll add that same one to email and password as well. Now for the name and password, we're going to add a min length property. So for the name, I think 2 characters is probably right. And for password, we should have a minimum length of 6. And I can see I've just made a spelling mistake here. It's min length. Next, we're going to add a unique property onto the email. So unique true. So that's going to ensure that each email address can only be used once. Now this is important as an email it's going to be the unique identifier for an account from the user's perspective. Finally, let's add the trim to each field. Trim is true. So that's going to trim off any white space at the beginning and the end of a string before it's saved. I'd also like to add a validator for the email address to ensure that we're saving a valid email. So to do this, we're going to have a custom validator, as Mongoose doesn't provide email validation out of the box. So a custom validator is defined in a model with the validate property. So let's go ahead and add that. And you need to assign this an object. And that's going to have 2 subproperties. The first one is validator, and that's the validator function. So I'm just going to put an empty function there for the moment. It's not going to do anything. And we'll fill that out in a moment. The next property is going to be message. So this is going to return an error message if the validation fails. So it's going to be a string, and let's set it to, we're going to put value in braces like that, and then go is not a valid email. So Mongoose is going to replace the value template here with the actual value that the user provides. Now we need to provide a function for the email validation, as we currently don't have one. So as you probably know, validating email is quite tricky, as there's many edge cases. So we definitely don't want to write our own complex regex and then have to test that. So let's use a third-party validator instead. So there's a great JavaScript library that we can use called Simply Validator. So let's install that. And once that's installed, we'll need to ensure the validator module is being included at the top of the script. So let's do that now. Okay, once we've done that, we're going to come down here and replace this function with the validator object, and we're going to use the isEmail function property of that. All right, so with that now done, we have a user model with correct validation. So let's test all this now by actually saving a new user model. So first make sure that your server is not listening. So, because it may attempt to run the code before we're finished, and that's not good. Then what we're going to do is create an instance of the user model by creating a new variable down here. We'll call it user, and we'll assign to that new user. Now in the configuration object, we'll need to add a name, and we'll just make it George or whatever you want. And then we'll add an email, so you can put anything here, just make sure it's a valid email. And then lastly, the password. Now let's intentionally test out the validation, and we're going to put a bunch of white space at the start, and then I'm going to just put the word test like that. Now that should fail, because the password has to be at least 6 characters, and all this beginning is white space that's going to get trimmed, so that would mean we only got 4 characters, so that should fail. Alright, let's now save this, and to do that, we're again going to have to use a async immediately invoked function expression. So we'll go async, oops, like that. And then in the body, we're going to put our try catch block again. Now inside the try, I'm going to create a variable doc and await the promise from user.save like that. And if it works, we're going to console log saved user. In the catch, we will console log the error so we can see what's going on with the validation. So I've just noticed I've made an error here. I've called the new user model item, which is not good. So let's rename that to user. And now what we want to do is run the server and test this user creation code. So we'll go up here, npm run server. Now, as expected, this causes an error. So let me open my terminal up a bit and we'll have a look here. We can see it says validator error, path password, and the value test is shorter than the minimum allowed 6. So that's good because it means the validation has worked. So let's go ahead and come down here and update that password value and make it something that will pass validation this time. You can get rid of the white space if you want or not, doesn't matter. Alright, so let's wait for the server to update now. And you can see once it's done it, this time it says saved user because now we obviously have valid data. So let's come over to Compass, and again we're going to press this refresh button, click on Print Bay, and we should now have a users collection there. And inside that you'll see we've got our user here, which is the one that we just saved. Now before we finish this video, let's make sure we add some better validation to the item model too. So you can see I've put a require true on the title, and I've also put a trim there. In fact, I put a trim on all the strings that we have. And finally, we're going to come down here and remove this creation of a user code, as we won't need that any further.